September 15th, 1943, over the Mediterranean Sea at 12,000 feet altitude, Lieutenant Marcus "Thunder" Johnson gripped the controls of his Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, humming with 2,400 horsepower beneath the cowling. The morning sun cast long shadows across the azure waters below, while scattered cumulus clouds drifted lazily at 8,000 feet. What Johnson couldn't know was that in exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, he would prove every doubter wrong and rewrite the rules of aerial engagement over the European theater. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the extraordinary account of how a young man from Detroit's East Side, flying what his critics called a lumbering truck with wings, would demonstrate that skill, determination, and split-second decision-making could overcome even the most advanced technology and experienced opposition. The Thunderbolt that carried Lieutenant Johnson into history that morning was aircraft serial number 42-75936, one of 8,495 P-47D models manufactured by Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, New York. Weighing 14,950 pounds when fully loaded, the massive fighter was powered by an engine that consumed 120 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel per hour at combat power. Its 850 caliber Browning M2 machine guns carried a total of 3,400 rounds of ammunition, giving it a theoretical firing time of 43 seconds before running dry. The aircraft's maximum speed at optimal altitude reached 433 miles per hour, though at the weight Johnson carried that morning, external fuel tanks still attached, she would struggle to exceed 360. Johnson had been assigned to the aircraft just 6 weeks earlier, when the 332nd Fighter Group received its first allocation of the new Thunderbolts to replace their aging P-40 Warhawks. The transition had not been smooth for any of the pilots, but for Johnson and his fellow airmen in the squadron, every challenge carried additional weight. They knew that eyes were watching, evaluating, measuring their performance against impossible standards. The young lieutenant had grown up in a 3-story brick house on Brush Street in Detroit, where his father worked the assembly line at the Ford Rouge plant, and his mother took in laundry to make ends meet. Marcus had been fascinated by aviation since the age of 7, when he witnessed a barnstormer perform aerobatics at a county fair outside the city. He'd built model airplanes from balsa wood and tissue paper, studying every line and angle until he could identify dozens of aircraft types from their silhouettes alone. When war came, he'd been among the first to volunteer, driven by a combination of patriotic duty and a burning desire to prove that excellence in the cockpit had nothing to do with the color of one's skin. Training at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama had been rigorous beyond anything Johnson had imagined. The program demanded perfection because anything less would be used as ammunition by those who believed black pilots lacked the intelligence, reflexes, or courage for aerial engagement. Johnson had graduated 3rd in his class of 47 pilots, with total flight time of 236 hours in primary trainers, advanced single-engine fighters, and formation flying exercises. His instructor ratings showed exceptional marks in gunnery, navigation, and aircraft handling, particularly in unusual attitude recovery and high-speed maneuvering. The Mediterranean theater had provided Johnson's squadron with its first taste of operational flying. They'd flown escort missions for B-24 Liberator bombers, striking oil refineries in Romania, conducted reconnaissance flights over occupied Greece, and engaged in ground attack missions against transportation targets in southern Italy. In 11 weeks of combat operations, Johnson had logged 63 hours of combat time and been credited with damaging 2 German transport aircraft during a low-level interdiction mission near Naples. But respect from their colleagues remained elusive. The Thunderbolt's reputation as a ground attack aircraft rather than a pure fighter had led many pilots from other squadrons to dismiss it as unsuitable for air-to-air engagement. Comments about flying trucks and aerial bulldozers were common in the officers' club, often accompanied by barely concealed skepticism about whether pilots from Tuskegee could handle such a complex aircraft effectively. The Thunderbolt's climb rate of 2,860 feet per minute and turning radius were inferior to most German fighters, leading many to assume it would be helpless in a dogfight situation. Captain Wilhelm Eagle Richter, whose Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6 had been specially modified with a larger engine and improved armament, represented everything that the German Air Force valued in its pilots. 26 years old and a veteran of campaigns over Britain, Russia and North Africa, Richter had accumulated 43 confirmed aerial victories and held the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. His aircraft bore distinctive black and yellow markings that had become feared symbols throughout Allied air bases in the region. The Messerschmitt's Daimler-Benz DB605AM engine produced 1,475 horsepower, giving the fighter a top speed of 428 miles per hour and a phenomenal climb rate of 3,760 feet per minute. Richter's squadron had been operating from a camouflaged airfield near Brindisi, flying interception missions against Allied bomber formations and conducting armed reconnaissance over the Adriatic Sea. The German pilot had developed a reputation for precise shooting and aggressive tactics, particularly his signature head-on attack that had claimed 17 of his victories. He flew with a wingman, Sergeant Hans Müller, whose Bf 109 F4 had been modified with additional armor plating and improved communications equipment. Intelligence reports indicated that Richter's unit had been reinforced with 2 additional aircraft the previous week, bringing their strength to 12 operational fighters. German maintenance crews had been working around the clock to keep the aircraft serviceable, despite chronic shortages of high-octane fuel, replacement parts and experienced ground personnel. Fuel availability had become so critical that German fighters were limited to patrols of 90 minutes duration, forcing them to engage quickly or break off contact to preserve enough fuel for landing. The morning of September 15th began routinely for Johnson's squadron. Reveille sounded at 0530 hours, followed by a breakfast of powdered eggs, canned bacon, and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed from tree bark. The weather briefing indicated clear skies with unlimited visibility, winds from the northwest at 15 knots, and scattered cloud layers between 6,000 and 10,000 feet. Intelligence reports mentioned possible German fighter activity in the target area, but nothing beyond the usual cautionary warnings. Johnson's assigned mission was a sweep over the Italian coast, between Bari and Brindisi, flying at medium altitude to identify any German aircraft movements or ground installations worthy of further investigation. He would fly alone, carrying 2 150-gallon external fuel tanks to extend his patrol time to 3 hours and 45 minutes. Radio procedures called for position reports every 30 minutes and immediate notification of any enemy contact, friendly or hostile. The pre-flight inspection of aircraft 42-75936 revealed no discrepancies. Engine oil levels showed full on the dipstick, tire pressure registered normal, and the control surfaces moved freely through their full range of motion. Johnson personally checked the ammunition load, confirming that each of the 8 machine guns had been loaded with 425 rounds of mixed ball and armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. The external fuel tanks had been topped off with a total of 300 gallons of 150-octane aviation gasoline, bringing the aircraft's total weight to just over 15,000 pounds. Engine start occurred at 0815 hours, with the massive Pratt & Whitney rumbling to life on the second attempt. Johnson completed his run-up procedures, checking magnetos, carburetor heat, and propeller operation according to the detailed checklist taped to his instrument panel. Ground control cleared him for takeoff at 0828, and the heavily laden Thunderbolt required nearly 4,000 feet of runway before breaking ground into the crystalline morning air. Climbing northwest toward his patrol area, Johnson leveled off at 12,000 feet and settled into the routine of long-range navigation. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly below, its surface broken only by the occasional fishing boat or Allied naval vessel. The external fuel tanks would burn off first, reducing his aircraft's weight and improving its maneuverability for the return flight. Radio chatter from other Allied aircraft indicated normal operations throughout the theater, with no unusual enemy activity reported. Captain Richter had taken off from his base near Brindisi 23 minutes after Johnson, leading a two-aircraft patrol consisting of himself and Sergeant Mueller. Their assigned area overlapped with Johnson's intended route, though neither pilot was aware of the other's presence. German ground control had vectored them toward a reported Allied reconnaissance aircraft operating southwest of their position, providing altitude and heading estimates that would bring the two formations into contact. The technical specifications of the opposing aircraft reflected different design philosophies shaped by their respective nations' strategic requirements. The Thunderbolt had been conceived as a high-altitude escort fighter capable of protecting bomber formations during deep penetration missions. Its massive size accommodated large fuel tanks, heavy armament, and robust construction that could absorb significant battle damage. The thick wing profile housed 4 machine guns per side and provided stable gun platform for long-range shooting. The Messerschmitt represented German emphasis on performance and agility over durability. Its inline engine installation allowed for a more streamlined fuselage, while the narrow chord wing provided exceptional roll rate and turning performance at the cost of fuel capacity and structural strength. The single cannon firing through the propeller hub, supplemented by 2 machine guns in the cowling, concentrated tremendous firepower in a small package that could deliver devastating bursts during brief firing opportunities. Richter's tactical doctrine emphasized speed and surprise, using his aircraft's superior climb rate to gain altitude advantage before diving on unsuspecting targets. His standard attack profile involved a high-speed pass from above and behind, firing a short burst at close range before using his momentum to climb away for another attack. The strategy had proven effective against bomber formations and inexperienced fighter pilots who failed to maintain proper lookout procedures. Johnson's training at Tuskegee had emphasized different tactics appropriate to the Thunderbolt's characteristics. Instructors had drilled into their students the importance of maintaining speed and altitude, using the aircraft's superior high-altitude performance and diving speed to offset its inferior turning ability. The key was to avoid turning fights at low altitude, where lighter German fighters held every advantage. Instead, Thunderbolt pilots were taught to use high-speed slashing attacks, hit-and-run tactics, and defensive maneuvers that played to their aircraft's strengths. At 0947 hours, Johnson spotted 2 dark specks approximately 15 miles to his southeast, flying roughly parallel to his course at slightly lower altitude. The contacts appeared to be single-engine fighters, though positive identification was impossible at such distance. Standard procedure called for him to maintain course and altitude while attempting to identify the aircraft type and nationality. If they proved hostile, his orders were to avoid engagement unless attacked directly, since his primary mission was reconnaissance rather than combat. Richter had simultaneously identified Johnson's Thunderbolt, recognizing the distinctive profile and large size that marked American fighter aircraft. The German pilot immediately began a climbing turn to gain altitude advantage, signaling Mueller to follow in trail formation. Their standard approach would position them above and behind the target, before initiating an attack dive that would give them maximum speed and surprise advantage. The geometry of aerial engagement was developing with mathematical precision. Johnson maintained his straight course at 12,000 feet and 290 miles per hour, unaware that hostile aircraft were maneuvering into attack position above him. Richter climbed to 15,000 feet, positioning his formation directly behind Johnson's flight path, where the American pilot's rear-view mirrors provided no visibility. The German pilot's experience told him that one decisive attack would be sufficient to eliminate the threat. Johnson's first indication of danger came when his peripheral vision caught sunlight reflecting off canopy glass high above his port quarter. Years of training and natural survival instincts triggered immediate action as he identified the glinting objects as aircraft in a diving attack. Without hesitation, he jettisoned both external fuel tanks and pushed the throttle forward to maximum power, feeling the Pratt & Whitney respond with a surge of acceleration that pressed him back into his seat. The decision to drop his external tanks proved crucial, instantly reducing his aircraft's weight by over 1,000 pounds and dramatically improving its acceleration and maneuverability. The empty tanks tumbled away behind him, their aluminum surfaces flashing in the sunlight as they fell toward the sea below. Johnson's airspeed indicator began climbing through 300 miles per hour as the powerful engine drove the now lighter aircraft forward with increasing momentum. Richter's first attack came exactly as Johnson had been trained to expect, a high-speed diving pass from above and behind, with the German pilot firing a concentrated burst from his cannon and machine guns. Johnson's evasive action consisted of a sharp turn to port combined with a sudden climb, using the Thunderbolt's superior power-to-weight ratio to escape the initial attack vector. The German pilot's shots passed harmlessly through the space where Johnson's aircraft had been moments before. The engagement that followed would demonstrate the critical importance of pilot skill over aircraft performance specifications. Richter attempted to convert his diving speed into a zoom climb that would position him for another attack, but Johnson's aggressive maneuvering forced the German pilot to turn more tightly than optimal, bleeding off energy and reducing his altitude advantage. The American pilot's training in energy management began to show its value as he maintained his aircraft's momentum while forcing his opponent to dissipate speed in turning. Johnson's radio crackled with his own voice as he transmitted contact report to ground control, providing his position, altitude, and enemy aircraft count. The transmission would alert nearby Allied fighters to the engagement and potentially bring assistance, though Johnson knew that help was unlikely to arrive before the aerial duel reached its conclusion. He was committed to fighting alone against two experienced German pilots in aircraft specifically designed for air-to-air engagement. Müller attempted to position himself for a crossing shot, as Johnson and Richter maneuvered in an increasingly tight spiral. The German sergeant found himself frustrated by the Thunderbolt's unpredictable flight path and the American pilot's apparent anticipation of every attack attempt. Johnson seemed to know instinctively when to turn, climb, or dive to avoid presenting a stable target for more than a few seconds at a time. The psychological aspect of aerial engagement became increasingly important as the initial exchange extended beyond the 30-second duration that typically decided such encounters. Johnson's confidence grew as he realized that his aircraft was not the helpless victim that many had predicted. The Thunderbolt's robust construction absorbed several near misses without significant damage, while its powerful engine maintained performance despite the demanding flight regime imposed by combat maneuvering. Richter's frustration mounted as his ammunition began to run low without achieving any significant hits on the elusive American fighter. The German ace had built his reputation on quick, decisive engagements that ended with his opponent falling in flames after a single well-aimed burst. Johnson's survival beyond the first attack had already exceeded Richter's experience with Allied fighter pilots, forcing him to reconsider tactics that had proven successful for over 2 years of combat operations. The turning point came when Johnson reversed his defensive maneuvering and transitioned to aggressive tactics that caught both German pilots completely off guard. Instead of continuing to evade their attacks, he suddenly pulled his aircraft into a steep climbing turn that brought him face-to-face with Müller's Messerschmitt at a range of less than 400 yards. The move was so unexpected that the German sergeant had no time to react before Johnson's 8 machine guns opened fire in a concentrated burst that lasted exactly 2 3/10 seconds. The effect was devastating and immediate. Johnson's armor-piercing incendiary rounds struck Müller's aircraft across the engine compartment and cockpit area, causing multiple system failures and forcing the German pilot to break off the engagement. Smoke began streaming from the Messerschmitt's engine as Müller attempted to maintain control while his aircraft lost altitude and speed. Within moments, it became clear that his fighter was no longer capable of sustained combat operations. Richter watched in disbelief as his wingman's aircraft descended toward the sea, with its engine trailing thick black smoke. The sight triggered a mixture of rage and professional respect for the American pilot, who had just demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything German intelligence had credited to Allied fighter pilots. The engagement had evolved from a routine interception into a personal test of skill between two experienced aviators. The psychological dynamics shifted dramatically as Richter found himself alone against an opponent who had already proven capable of defeating supposedly superior German equipment and tactics. The American pilot's Thunderbolt showed no signs of damage despite multiple near misses, while its pilot continued to maneuver with precision and confidence that suggested extensive combat experience. Richter began to question the intelligence reports that had dismissed American pilots as inadequately trained and inferior in aerial combat skills. Johnson's tactical situation had improved significantly with Müller's departure from the engagement. Fighting one-on-one eliminated the threat of coordinated attacks and allowed him to focus entirely on Richter's movements without concern for additional threats from unexpected directions. The American pilot's training in single combat maneuvering began to show its value as he worked to gain position advantage over his remaining opponent. The altitude of the engagement had gradually decreased from its initial 12,000 feet to approximately 8,000 feet, bringing both aircraft into denser air where engine power output increased and control surface effectiveness improved. Johnson used this change to his advantage, maintaining aggressive maneuvering that forced Richter to operate his Messerschmitt at the edge of its performance envelope. The German pilot's fuel state was becoming critical after nearly 20 minutes of combat power operation. Richter's ammunition supply had been reduced to less than 50 rounds for his cannon and fewer than 200 rounds for his machine guns, forcing him to exercise extreme fire discipline and wait for perfect shooting opportunities. Johnson's 8 machine guns still retained over 2,000 rounds of ammunition, giving him a significant advantage in any prolonged exchange of fire. The American pilot could afford to take longer shots and multiple firing passes without concern for running dry. The technical specifications of both aircraft began to tell their story as the engagement continued beyond normal expectations. The Thunderbolt's massive fuel capacity allowed Johnson to maintain combat power without immediate concern for reaching his home base, while Richter's smaller fuel tanks forced increasingly conservative engine management. The German pilot's superior turning performance was offset by his opponent's ability to sustain high power settings and energy-intensive maneuvering. Johnson's next attack demonstrated the value of patience and tactical awareness developed through intensive training. Instead of attempting to match the Messerschmitt's turning ability, he used the Thunderbolt's superior high-speed handling to execute a rolling dive that positioned him on Richter's tail at a range of 600 yards. The German pilot's evasive turn only served to provide a deflection shot opportunity as Johnson opened fire with all 8 machine guns in a sustained burst. The concentration of firepower from 850 caliber machine guns created a cone of destruction that no single-engine fighter could survive without multiple direct hits. Johnson's burst lasted 4 seconds and expended over 200 rounds, creating a pattern of traces that seemed to fill the air around Richter's aircraft. Several rounds struck the Messerschmitt's wing and fuselage, causing visible damage and forcing the German pilot to take increasingly desperate evasive action. Richter's aircraft began showing signs of critical damage as hydraulic fluid streamed from bullet holes in the wing and engine compartment. The control surfaces responded sluggishly to his inputs, while engine temperatures climbed beyond normal operating limits. The German ace realized that his aircraft was no longer capable of sustained combat operations and began to consider his limited options for survival. The engagement that critics had predicted would last mere seconds in Germany's favor had now extended beyond 3 minutes, with the American pilot not only surviving, but gaining decisive advantage over one of Germany's most experienced aces. Johnson's demonstration of skill, tactical awareness, and aircraft handling had shattered preconceived notions about both the Thunderbolt's combat capabilities and the quality of American pilot training. Smoke began trailing from Richter's engine as internal damage caused by Johnson's machine gun fire created multiple system failures. The German pilot's instrument panel showed rapidly climbing oil temperature, dropping oil pressure, and erratic engine operation that indicated catastrophic internal damage. His radio attempts to contact base headquarters went unanswered, suggesting that his communications equipment had also been damaged in the exchange. Johnson maintained his pursuit as Richter's aircraft lost altitude and airspeed, but professional discretion prevented him from delivering a final attack on an obviously disabled opponent. The American pilot's training emphasized the difference between legitimate combat engagement and unnecessary destruction of defeated enemies. His mission had been reconnaissance, not seeking combat, and he had already achieved more than adequate demonstration of his capabilities. The final moments of the engagement saw Richter's Messerschmitt descending toward the sea in a controlled glide, with its engine windmilling uselessly. The German pilot had successfully maintained aircraft control despite extensive battle damage, demonstrating the skill that had made him one of his nation's leading aces. Johnson circled overhead, maintaining visual contact to ensure that his opponent reached the water safely and could be rescued by air-sea rescue services. Richter's aircraft touched down on the Mediterranean surface approximately 12 miles southeast of the Italian coast, its pilot executing a textbook emergency landing that minimized impact damage and allowed him to evacuate the cockpit before the fighter sank beneath the waves. Johnson transmitted the location to Allied rescue coordination, knowing that military protocol required assistance for downed airmen, regardless of nationality. The return flight to base gave Johnson time to process what had just occurred and consider its implications. He had not only survived an encounter with Germany's elite fighter pilots, but had emerged victorious through superior tactics, aircraft handling, and situational awareness. The engagement would provide valuable intelligence about German fighter capabilities and tactics, while demonstrating that American pilots and aircraft were fully capable of meeting any challenge presented by enemy forces. Ground control vectored Johnson toward his home base, as fuel gauges indicated sufficient remaining supply for normal landing procedures. The Thunderbolt had performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, absorbing battle damage without significant degradation of flight characteristics or systems operation. Johnson's post-flight inspection would reveal several bullet holes in non-critical areas, testament to how close the encounter had been despite his tactical victory. The landing approach at Johnson's home base proceeded normally, with the massive Thunderbolt settling onto the runway, with characteristic grace despite its size and weight. Ground crew members noticed the bullet holes immediately and gathered around the aircraft as Johnson completed his shutdown procedures. The young pilot's calm demeanor gave no indication of the extraordinary events that had just transpired over the Mediterranean Sea. Intelligence debriefing would consume the remainder of Johnson's day as staff officers attempted to extract every detail of the engagement for analysis and tactical development. His description of German fighter tactics, aircraft performance, and pilot behavior provided valuable insights that would be distributed throughout Allied fighter squadrons in the Mediterranean theater. The information would save lives and improve combat effectiveness in future encounters. Captain Richter's rescue occurred 3 hours after his emergency landing, when an Italian fishing vessel spotted his position markers and hauled him aboard. The German ace had suffered minor injuries during the water landing, but retained full capability for future flight operations once suitable aircraft became available. His debriefing by German intelligence officers would provide an equally valuable analysis of American fighter capabilities and tactics. The impact of September 15th's engagement extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. Word spread quickly through Allied air bases that a Thunderbolt pilot had defeated Germany's leading ace in single combat, providing dramatic evidence that American pilots and aircraft could match any opposition the enemy might present. The story became a powerful morale booster for pilots who had questioned their equipment's capabilities and their own training adequacy. German intelligence analysis of Richter's report forced immediate revision of tactical doctrine regarding engagement with American fighter aircraft. Previous assumptions about Allied pilot training, aircraft performance, and tactical capabilities proved dangerously inadequate when confronted with actual combat results. New briefings emphasized the need for extreme caution when engaging Thunderbolts and other American fighters previously dismissed as inferior equipment. The technical lessons learned from the engagement influenced aircraft development and tactical training throughout both air forces. American engineers gained confidence in the Thunderbolt's design philosophy, while German designers began incorporating additional armor and improved engine cooling systems into new fighter variants. Pilot training programs on both sides emphasized energy management, situational awareness, and the critical importance of proper tactical execution. Johnson's squadron mates greeted his return with mixture of amazement and professional pride. The young pilot had proven that skill and determination could overcome any perceived disadvantage in equipment or experience. His victory provided powerful validation for the intensive training program at Tuskegee and demonstrated that excellence in aerial combat depended entirely on individual capability rather than racial background. The psychological impact on German fighter pilots proved equally significant as word of Richter's defeat spread through Luftwaffe units throughout the Mediterranean theater. The loss of such an experienced and successful ace to a previously unknown American pilot forced reassessment of enemy capabilities and tactical approaches. Morale suffered as pilots realized that their technical advantages might not be sufficient to guarantee victory in aerial engagement. Intelligence reports from both sides would analyze the engagement for years afterward, attempting to identify the critical factors that had determined its outcome. Johnson's tactical decisions, particularly his choice to jettison external fuel tanks immediately and transition from defensive to offensive maneuvering, became standard teaching points in fighter pilot training curricula. The engagement demonstrated that proper training and aggressive execution could overcome significant odds in aerial combat. The broader implications of the encounter extended to strategic planning for both Allied and German air operations in the Mediterranean theater. American commanders gained confidence in their pilots' capabilities and began authorizing more aggressive patrol patterns that brought fighter aircraft into contact with German opposition. German Air Force leadership was forced to husband their remaining experienced pilots more carefully and avoid unnecessary risks in marginal tactical situations. Johnson's aircraft underwent complete technical inspection following the engagement, revealing the extent of battle damage sustained during the 3-minute encounter. 17 bullet holes were found in non-critical areas of the fuselage and wings, while the engine showed no signs of damage, despite operating at maximum power for extended periods. The inspection validated Republic Aviation's design philosophy, emphasizing structural robustness and battle damage tolerance. Maintenance crews discovered that Johnson's aircraft had consumed exactly 437 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition during the engagement, leaving over 2,000 rounds remaining in the feed systems. The American pilot's fire discipline had been excellent throughout the encounter, with most shots fired in short, well-aimed bursts rather than extended spraying that would have quickly exhausted his ammunition supply. The tactical lesson reinforced training emphasis on precise shooting rather than volume of fire. Post-engagement analysis revealed that the encounter had lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds from first contact to Richter's emergency water landing. During that time, the aircraft had covered approximately 18 miles of horizontal distance and descended from 12,000 feet to sea level. The rapid pace of aerial combat provided little time for complex tactical planning, emphasizing the importance of instinctive reactions developed through intensive training. German records captured after the war would reveal that Captain Richter never returned to combat operations, having been transferred to training duties following his recovery from the Mediterranean encounter. The psychological impact of defeat by an opponent he had been trained to consider inferior proved more lasting than any physical injuries sustained during the emergency landing. His experience became a cautionary tale within German fighter pilot circles about the dangers of underestimating Allied capabilities. The technical intelligence gathered from the engagement proved valuable for both aircraft manufacturers and military planners. Republic Aviation engineers gained detailed feedback about Thunderbolt performance under extreme combat conditions, while Messerschmitt designers learned about vulnerabilities in their aircraft's fuel system and engine cooling arrangements. Both sides incorporated lessons learned into subsequent aircraft development programs. Johnson's victory report became required reading in Allied fighter pilot training programs throughout the war, providing detailed analysis of successful tactics against German opposition. His description of energy management, situational awareness, and aggressive maneuvering provided practical guidance for pilots facing similar tactical situations. The report's influence on training curricula extended far beyond the immediate participants in the Mediterranean theater. The strategic implications of individual aerial encounters often exceeded their immediate tactical importance, and September 15th's engagement proved no exception. Johnson's victory demonstrated Allied pilot quality and equipment effectiveness to both friendly and enemy forces, influencing morale, tactical doctrine, and strategic planning throughout the remaining years of conflict. Single actions by individual pilots could have consequences far beyond their immediate participants. Weather conditions during the engagement had been nearly perfect for aerial combat, with unlimited visibility, calm air, and moderate temperatures that allowed both aircraft to operate at peak performance levels. The lack of clouds provided no concealment opportunities for either pilot, forcing the encounter to be decided purely on the basis of pilot skill and tactical execution, rather than environmental advantages. Radio communications during the engagement had been minimal, with Johnson transmitting only essential information to ground control stations. His disciplined communication procedures prevented enemy interception of tactical information, while ensuring that Allied forces remained informed of the encounter's progress. The American pilot's radio discipline reflected training emphasis on security consciousness during combat operations. The psychological preparation that had enabled Johnson's success began years before the actual encounter, with family influences, educational opportunities, and personal determination combining to create the foundation for exceptional performance under extreme stress. His childhood fascination with aviation had provided motivation for the intensive study and training required to become a military pilot, while family support had given him confidence to pursue goals that many considered impossible. Training at Tuskegee Army Airfield had been intentionally demanding, designed to produce pilots whose capabilities could not be questioned by critics seeking evidence of inadequacy. Johnson's class had endured academic instruction, flight training, and military discipline that exceeded requirements for other pilot training programs, creating a cadre of aviators whose skills were demonstrably superior to standard requirements. The investment in exceptional training paid dividends when tested under actual combat conditions. The aircraft maintenance that had enabled Johnson's aircraft to perform flawlessly during combat reflected the dedication of ground crew personnel whose work often went unrecognized. Sergeant Robert Wrench Williams had personally overseen the pre-flight preparation of aircraft 42-75936, ensuring that engine timing, control surface rigging, and ammunition loading met exact specifications. His attention to detail had contributed directly to the mission's successful outcome. Intelligence preparation for the mission had provided Johnson with detailed briefings about German fighter tactics, aircraft performance characteristics, and pilot experience levels. The information allowed him to anticipate enemy actions and develop appropriate counter-tactics before entering combat. American intelligence officers' analysis of captured documents and interrogation reports had created a comprehensive understanding of German capabilities that proved invaluable during actual encounters. The technical superiority that many had attributed to German aircraft proved less decisive than anticipated when confronted with superior pilot training and aggressive tactics. Johnson's Thunderbolt had been dismissed by critics as too large, too heavy, and too slow for effective air-to-air combat, but proper employment of its strengths had overcome apparent disadvantages. The engagement demonstrated that aircraft design philosophy must be matched with appropriate tactical doctrine to achieve maximum effectiveness. Logistics support that had enabled American forces to operate effectively in the Mediterranean theater represented a triumph of industrial organization and strategic planning. The fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and maintenance equipment required to keep Johnson's squadron operational had been transported thousands of miles across ocean supply lines, vulnerable to enemy interdiction. The engagement's successful outcome validated the enormous investment in supporting infrastructure. The personal courage required for Johnson to engage two experienced German pilots in aircraft specifically designed for air-to-air combat cannot be overstated. Military training could provide skills and knowledge, but individual determination to press an attack against superior numbers required character traits that could not be taught in classroom instruction. Johnson's aggressive tactics reflected personal courage combined with professional confidence in his abilities and equipment. Cultural barriers that Johnson had overcome to reach the cockpit of a frontline fighter aircraft were as formidable as any enemy he would face in aerial combat. Social attitudes of the 1940s had created institutional obstacles to black participation in military aviation. requiring exceptional persistence and ability to gain access to flight training opportunities. His success in combat provided powerful evidence that artificial barriers had denied valuable capabilities to American military forces. The international implications of Johnson's victory extended beyond immediate military considerations to broader questions of social justice and human capability. Allied propaganda services recognized the value of demonstrating American democratic principles through military success achieved by previously excluded groups. German propaganda, conversely, found itself embarrassed by defeat at the hands of pilots their ideology had characterized as racially inferior. Engineering lessons learned from the engagement influenced post-war aircraft development throughout the aviation industry. The Thunderbolt's robust construction and powerful engine had proven their worth under extreme combat conditions, validating design approaches that emphasize durability and performance over lightweight and agility. Future fighter aircraft would incorporate similar design philosophies adapted to jet propulsion technology. The training methodologies that had prepared Johnson for aerial combat became models for pilot development programs throughout Allied air forces. Emphasis on energy management, situational awareness, and aggressive tactics proved their value when tested under actual combat conditions. Training programs adopted standardized curricula based on successful techniques demonstrated by pilots like Johnson in operational environments. Historical documentation of the engagement relied on Johnson's detailed mission report, German records captured after the war, and technical analysis of battle damage to participating aircraft. The convergence of multiple source materials provided comprehensive understanding of tactical developments, technical performance, and human factors that had determined the encounter's outcome. Accurate historical records would prove valuable for future military planning and pilot training development. The medical aspects of high-performance aerial combat placed tremendous physical demands on pilots operating at the limits of human endurance. Johnson had experienced gravitational forces exceeding 4 times normal during tight turns and rapid maneuvering, requiring exceptional physical conditioning and mental focus to maintain aircraft control and tactical awareness. Military medical research would use data from such encounters to improve pilot selection criteria and training programs. Economic implications of individual aerial encounters reflected the enormous costs associated with modern military aviation. Johnson's Thunderbolt represented an investment of approximately $85,000 in 1943 currency, while German fighter aircraft carried similar price tags that strained wartime production budgets. The loss of trained pilots represented even greater economic impact, given the time and resources required for replacement training. The technological race between opposing air forces had produced increasingly sophisticated aircraft and equipment that required exceptional pilot skill for effective employment. Johnson's success demonstrated that human factors remained decisive elements in aerial combat, despite advances in aircraft performance and weapons systems. Future military planning would need to balance technological development with investment in high-quality pilot training programs. International recognition of Johnson's achievement came through military decorations, promotion, and assignment to increasingly responsible positions within Allied air operations. His success provided powerful demonstration of American military effectiveness, while challenging preconceived notions about racial capabilities in demanding military specialties. The recognition reflected growing awareness that artificial barriers had prevented optimal utilization of available human resources. The strategic bombing campaign that provided the broader context for Johnson's patrol mission represented Allied commitment to defeating German industrial capacity through systematic destruction of production facilities. Fighter escorts like Johnson's squadron enabled heavy bomber formations to penetrate deep into enemy territory and deliver devastating attacks on critical targets. Individual aerial encounters contributed to larger strategic objectives through cumulative effects on enemy capabilities. Post-war interviews with German pilots revealed their surprise and respect for American fighter pilot capabilities demonstrated during encounters like Johnson's victory over Richter. Professional admiration transcended national and racial boundaries, when skill and courage were demonstrated under combat conditions. Such recognition validated the worth of individuals who had overcome significant obstacles to participate in military aviation. The documentation standards that preserved detailed records of Johnson's engagement reflected military emphasis on learning from combat experience to improve future operations. Mission reports, technical analyses, and pilot debriefings created comprehensive databases that informed tactical development, training programs, and equipment modification throughout the war. The systematic approach to knowledge preservation proved invaluable for continuous improvement of military effectiveness. Weather reconnaissance that had provided accurate forecasting for Johnson's mission represented sophisticated meteorological capabilities developed specifically for military aviation support. Precise knowledge of wind patterns, visibility conditions, and atmospheric stability enabled optimal mission planning and execution. The infrastructure required for comprehensive weather services reflected enormous investment in supporting capabilities that made frontline operations possible. The communication systems that had enabled Johnson to report his engagement and coordinate with ground control stations represented advanced radio technology adapted for military aviation requirements. Reliable voice communications provided tactical coordination, navigation assistance, and emergency support that significantly improved pilot survival and mission effectiveness. Technical development in military communications would continue throughout the war and influence post-war civilian aviation. Navigation equipment that had guided Johnson to his assigned patrol area and safely home represented precision instruments developed specifically for long-range military operations. Dead reckoning techniques, radio compass bearings, and celestial navigation provided multiple methods for determining aircraft position over vast ocean areas. The reliability of navigation systems directly influenced mission success rates and pilot survival in operational environments. Industrial production that had created Johnson's Thunderbolt represented mobilization of American manufacturing capabilities for military purposes on an unprecedented scale. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale facility employed over 25,000 workers operating around the clock to produce fighter aircraft for global military operations. The industrial achievement enabled American forces to equip pilots with equipment superior to anything available to enemy forces. The supply chain management that had delivered fuel, ammunition, and spare parts to Johnson's squadron reflected logistical capabilities spanning multiple continents and ocean transportation systems. Coordination between manufacturers, transportation services, and military distribution networks enabled consistent support for combat operations thousands of miles from production facilities. The logistical achievement was as impressive as any technological advancement in military equipment. Training standardization that had prepared Johnson for combat operations represented systematic development of pilot capabilities based on analysis of successful tactics and techniques. Standardized curricula ensured consistent quality across multiple training facilities while incorporating lessons learned from operational experience. The investment in comprehensive pilot development programs produced aviators capable of maximum effectiveness in demanding combat environments. Quality control procedures that had ensured Johnson's aircraft and equipment met exact specifications reflected manufacturing standards developed for military aviation requirements. Rigorous testing, inspection, and documentation procedures eliminated defective components before they could cause operational failures. The commitment to exceptional quality standards contributed directly to mission success and pilot survival in combat operations. Research and development programs that had created the Thunderbolt's advanced engine, armament, and flight control systems represented coordination between government agencies, private industry, and academic institutions. The systematic approach to technological advancement produced innovations that provided decisive advantages over enemy equipment. Continued investment in research and development would remain critical for maintaining technological superiority throughout the conflict. Human factors research that had optimized cockpit design, flight instruments, and pilot equipment reflected scientific approaches to improving military effectiveness through better understanding of human capabilities and limitations. Ergonomic design principles, psychological research, and physiological studies contributed to aircraft configurations that maximized pilot performance under extreme stress. The interdisciplinary approach to human factors would influence military and civilian aviation development for decades. The international cooperation that had enabled Allied forces to coordinate operations across multiple theaters reflected diplomatic and military achievements in managing complex coalition warfare. Shared intelligence, coordinated planning, and standardized procedures enabled effective cooperation between forces from different nations with varying capabilities and objectives. Johnson's individual success contributed to broader Allied effectiveness through cumulative effects of coordinated operations. Educational programs that had provided Johnson with academic preparation for military aviation reflected expanded opportunities for advanced learning, despite social barriers that had historically limited access to higher education. Technical knowledge in mathematics, physics, and engineering proved essential for understanding complex aircraft systems and navigation procedures. The investment in educational opportunities produced capabilities that contributed directly to military effectiveness. Social progress that Johnson's success represented extended beyond immediate military considerations to broader questions of civil rights and social justice in American society. Demonstrated excellence in demanding military specialties provided powerful evidence against racial discrimination, while proving the value of expanded opportunities for previously excluded groups. Military service became a catalyst for social change that would accelerate throughout the post-war period. The leadership development that had prepared Johnson for command responsibilities reflected military recognition that combat experience produced valuable capabilities for future assignments. Successful pilots like Johnson would be promoted to positions of increasing responsibility, where their experience and proven capabilities could influence training programs and operational planning. The systematic development of leadership capabilities ensured continuity of military effectiveness throughout the conflict. International law considerations that governed treatment of prisoners and combat operations provided ethical frameworks for conduct during aerial encounters. Johnson's professional behavior toward his defeated opponent reflected training in military ethics and rules of engagement that distinguished legitimate military operations from war crimes. Adherence to international legal standards maintained moral authority for Allied corps, while ensuring reciprocal treatment for Allied personnel in enemy hands. The technological integration that had combined engine, airframe, armament, and avionics systems into an effective fighting machine represented engineering achievements in managing complex technical relationships. Successful aircraft design required optimization of multiple competing requirements, while maintaining reliability under extreme operating conditions. The systematic approach to technical integration produced weapons systems that provided decisive advantages in combat operations. Cultural exchange that resulted from international military cooperation exposed American personnel to different societies and perspectives while demonstrating American values and capabilities to international audiences. Johnson's success provided powerful evidence of American democratic principles while challenging prejudices and misconceptions held by both allies and enemies. Military service became a means of cultural diplomacy that influenced international relationships throughout the war and beyond. The economic mobilization that had provided resources for military aviation reflected transformation of American industrial capacity from civilian to military production on an unprecedented scale. Coordination between government agencies and private industry produced weapons, equipment, and supplies that enabled global military operations. The achievement demonstrated American economic capabilities while providing foundation for post-war economic expansion. Scientific research that had advanced understanding of aerodynamics, propulsion, and materials, science contributed to aircraft performance improvements that provided decisive advantages in combat operations. Collaboration between academic institutions, government laboratories, and private industry produced technological innovations that revolutionized military aviation. Continued investment in scientific research would remain essential for maintaining technological superiority throughout the conflict. Military medicine that had ensured pilot health and fitness for demanding combat operations reflected advances in understanding human physiology under extreme stress conditions. Selection criteria, training programs, and medical support services maintained pilot capabilities throughout extended combat tours. The systematic approach to military medicine contributed directly to operational effectiveness while advancing medical knowledge that benefited civilian healthcare. The photographic documentation that preserved visual records of Johnson's aircraft and mission provided historical evidence of technical configurations and operational procedures. Military photographers created comprehensive archives that documented equipment development, tactical procedures, and personnel achievements throughout the conflict. The systematic approach to historical documentation would prove invaluable for post-war analysis and military planning. Intelligence gathering that had provided tactical information about enemy capabilities reflected sophisticated collection and analysis systems developed for military operations. Multiple sources of information combined to create comprehensive understanding of enemy strengths and weaknesses that informed operational planning. Johnson's combat report contributed valuable intelligence that improved tactical procedures for future encounters. The maintenance procedures that had kept Johnson's aircraft operational reflected standardized techniques developed for military aviation requirements. Preventive maintenance, quality control, and technical documentation ensured consistent aircraft availability for combat operations. The systematic approach to maintenance management provided reliability that enabled sustained combat effectiveness throughout extended operational periods. Training evaluation that had assessed pilot capabilities and identified areas for improvement reflected systematic approaches to personnel development based on performance measurement and feedback. Standardized testing procedures and objective performance criteria ensured consistent quality across multiple training facilities. The comprehensive approach to training evaluation produced pilots whose capabilities met demanding operational requirements. Strategic planning that had determined mission requirements and resource allocation reflected sophisticated analysis of military objectives and available capabilities. Coordination between intelligence, operations, and logistics staffs enabled effective utilization of limited resources for maximum military impact. Johnson's patrol mission contributed to broader strategic objectives through cumulative effects of multiple individual operations. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.